From Canada, Citizens Forum, where we look at the important issues of the day through a lens of democracy and media and try to figure out, how do we build a better country for ourselves? Hello, welcome to Citizens Forum. It is Saturday, January the 25th, 2025. Citizens Forum is coming from Victoria, British Columbia. It's a Canadian perspective on news and current affairs, but with the underlying idea that the biggest problems in Canada are the fact that we don't really have a very good functioning democracy here. The people at the top, and I mean the corporations and the 0.1%, have far too much power. And the people at the bottom, the 90% or the 95%, have become basically irrelevant in our society. So the decisions are being made without us. And also we'll be talking about the idea of what can we do to fix things up. So does it matter when we don't have a democracy and we don't have a free press? What's the problem with that? If what I'm saying is correct, what does it lead to? And I think what it leads to in Canada is stuff like this. And it is that Kingston becomes the latest Ontario city to declare food insecurity an emergency.
In 2019, there was approximately 18,000 meals that were served at St. Vincent de Paul for the whole year, right? And when you get to 2022, it's 51,000.
At the municipal level, Councillor Brandon Tozo proposed declaring food insecurity a citywide emergency, a motion that passed unanimously.
We need a Canada-wide solution for food insecurity. It is simply unacceptable to live in such a great country that we have, and people are going to bed hungry.
It's spiraling out of control.
Queen's University Health Studies professor Elaine Power, who has studied food insecurity for over 30 years, says the crisis stems from systemic issues.
Costs of housing and food have skyrocketed, and wages haven't kept up. Social assistance rates in Ontario are abysmal.
While the city will be requesting...
And the question to me is, how did we get into this mess where Kingston, Ontario, which, as I recollect, was a prosperous community, is now declaring a food insecurity emergency? And what the story says is, Kingston Public Health says 1 in 3 people are experiencing food insecurity in the area. In 2022, it was 1 in 9, which is also a disaster. But now they say it's 1 in 3 experiencing food insecurity. And I don't know if the numbers are right, because there almost seems like there's a bit of a loophole in there where the way the numbers are collected, it doesn't really mean food insecurity. But let's assume the numbers are somewhere close to correct, because we hear this a lot now. So let's just say it doesn't look good. And one of the biggest reasons for food insecurity is that housing costs, right? It's people are forced to, the price of food is going up also. And there's a big question about where that money is going. Is it going to the farmers? I read something from the National Farmers Union once, because nobody ever talks about this, but they said, this was a few months ago, that farmers have not been getting more money for what they're selling. So if that's correct, then the money is being made in the middle. But anyways, the housing problem is one of the biggest reasons for this food insecurity, because people are spending so much on rent and mortgages. So here's another story. This is from Real Estate Wealth. It says, and when I first saw this, which was maybe a year ago, it really shocked me. Study estimates over 1.3 million empty homes in Canada. If this number is true, then there's certainly a solution to our housing problem. People question the numbers, which is fair enough. And maybe the numbers are wrong, although they're collected, I think, they're collected by the OECD. The OECD is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is, a pretty reputable information gathering agency from Europe. So they're saying that 1.3 million homes are empty in Canada. And to me, the question is, why isn't this number ever discussed? I mean, maybe the number's right, maybe the number's wrong. But the fact that it's never discussed means that we Canadians can't even get into the game here. We don't even know this because it's simply not talked about. And which leads me to the final thing I want to say about this, which is we had an interview with a Professor Patrick Condon last week, and he talked about a solution to the housing crisis that we have in Canada. And the solution was, which he says has worked, he's an expert in the field, perhaps it won't work, but again, why don't we hear about it? And his solution is a very high tax on profits made from land sales. He said this, and he said we used to do this in Vancouver. He said they do it in other cities. The one he talked about was Vienna, Austria, and it seems to work. So again, why is the issue not talked about by either our media or our politicians? And therefore, we don't know about it. So the fact that we don't have a democracy, I think, and the fact that we don't have a free press, I think, leads to these kinds of situations in Canada where people are paying very high rents, many people, and many people are paying very high mortgages to the point where they can't eat. And there are solutions out there which we're not ever told about. And there are other solutions besides the one that Patrick Condon mentioned. So Norm, I'm going to finish that there. Your turn.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a whole bunch in there to unpack. First of all, did you know how important today is?
No.
It's Rabbie Burns Day. Now, people just think of him as that Scottish poet and haggis and the rest of it. There's a lot more that he was actually using a lot of his poetry. They believe he was writing a lot of letters about democracy and freedom at the time. He's, shall we say, it was quite a freedom fighter in his own right. It's something maybe we should almost recognize today as Democracy Freedom Day or something nationally or internationally because of him. I mean, he was that strong a figure.
Right.
But you were also talking about the vacant homes. Are you aware that the rent for a lot of apartments is going down in places like Toronto and Vancouver? Now it's for apartments that are, well, I guess you could say still within the working class level, but they're at the top end. $2,500 a month is now, they're renting the apartments out for a mere $2,400 a month now. Well, it's not much of a reduction, but there is a whole problem with at that end, and it's probably accounting for a lot of the vacant housing that we have, that they're just going to have to lower the rent. That the housing is there. They just have to change the standards for what they're doing.
Yeah. So Norm, you were going to talk about the $500 billion AI initiative down in the States.
Yeah, that the first one is an interview with or not an interview, a panel discussion with this Derek Brose, and he's got a real concern over technocracy, which leads into this whole thing with this Stargate issue, that there's actually one person missing there, and I'll get to that in a minute, of them coming up with this $500 billion private-public partnership to promote mRNA injections, AI, and transhumanism. Well, that's going to be very serious down the road, that just the AI, that where that's going, the amount of energy that's going to take. It could go on for a long time on here. What I find interesting, though, is you've got, let's see, Sam Altman, Larry Ellison, maybe got the names wrong, but anyways, Larry Ellison is one that he's quite big on using mRNA injections and how important they are. This seems to be the big thing. But the person missing is Elon Musk, and he's quite against this, which is surprising. Someone so high up in Trump's administration, even if he's not officially in it, so high up, he's, shall we say, that he's criticizing in the first week what Trump is doing. And we're going to be seeing a lot more of this, that even the, I guess you could say, reasonable right wing is beginning to question a lot of Trump's moves. That one project, we haven't heard the criticisms in the mainstream media, but there's certainly a lot coming out from people that were formerly strong Trump supporters. And I'm just wondering how far that's going to go before that whole...
And this is the $500 billion, which I've heard of, but I don't really know anything about it, investment in the infrastructure needed to make AI more powerful. Is that what it's all about?
It's one of the big factors. And by making it more powerful, they'll be able to create on-demand mRNA vaccines to...
Oh, yes.
I mean, you've heard little bits and pieces about it, but when you start unpacking all of it, you realize, whoa, this is a big thing. Now, I personally think it's almost impossible to build all these data centers as quickly as they think, because, I mean, these are large structures. They require a lot of electric power to run, which in itself I find questionable. If they're concerned about CO2 emissions and climate change, a lot of these will be run by, well, they are talking about nuclear, but a lot will be run by fossil fuels. So
nuclear is worse.
Well, I agree with you there. So if they're concerned about these things, why are they building more of these AI centers?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, $500 billion is not a joke in terms of money. And I mean, the whole world is already so much in debt. Okay. Yeah. So, keep an eye on that. I want to show a brief interview. This is about 5 or 6 minutes long, with Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, the senator from the United States. What's happening right now in the States is that the people who President Trump has nominated to be the heads of the various agencies that run the U.S. government, that are part of the U.S. government, the people he nominates to be the heads have to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate. So they have to go through a confirmation process where they're questioned by a committee. And this is Bernie Sanders questioning, I don't remember the gentleman's name, but he has been proposed as the Treasury Secretary by President Trump. So the interview is about 6 minutes long. It raises a lot of, I think, interesting questions and issues. And I would say it's also the same in Canada when Mr. Sanders talks about the various problems that exist in the United States. I think we can say that it's not that different here in Canada. So here is that interview, and then we'll do a short discussion after it's over.
Mr. Besant, thanks very much for being in the office the other day. Mr. Besant, the United States today has more income and wealth inequality than has ever existed in the history of our country. You got 3 people on top, Mr. Musk, Mr. Bezos, and Mr. Zuckerberg, who are now worth almost $1 trillion. That is more than half of the bottom of our society, some 170 million people. 3 people, more wealth than the bottom, 170 million. We have more concentration of ownership today than we have ever had. We have more concentration of ownership in the media, where a handful of billionaires like Musk, Bezos, Rupert Murdoch increasingly own the media and the information that the American people receive. We have a corrupt campaign finance system in which a small number of billionaires in both political parties make huge contributions into the presidential and congressional campaigns. When you have a small number of multi-billionaires who have enormous economic, media, and political power, would you agree with President Biden, who last night stated, and I quote, "An oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights, and freedoms," end of quote. That's what President Biden said last night. I agree with him. Do you?
Senator Sanders, I enjoyed our visit.
Talk a little bit closer into the mic.
I enjoyed our visit, and I hope you got my follow-up materials that on the discussions, my previous writings on the tariffs and China. And look, the three billionaires who you listed that all made the money themselves. Mr. Musk came to the country as an immigrant.
I understand that, but what I'm asking you is, when you have a handful of people like Musk, who will soon be part of the Trump administration, and others, when you have three people owning more wealth than the bottom half of American society, when these people have enormous influence over the media, when they spend huge amounts of money in both political parties to elect candidates, what Biden said last night is we're moving toward an oligarchy. I'm asking you that question. Do you think, forget how they made their money, do you think that when so few people have so much wealth and so much economic and political power, that that is an oligarchic form of society?
Well, I would note that President Biden gave the Presidential Medal of Freedom to two people who I think would qualify for his oligarchs. This is not a condemnation of any one individual. I'm just asking you, would so few people have so much wealth and power? But do you think that that is an oligarchic form of society? Senator, I think it depends on the ability to move up and down the income.
No, that's not really the answer. I mean, even if you had that mobility, no matter who those individuals might be. All right, but let me ask you another question. Right now in America, we have over 22 million workers who are making less than $15 an hour, and nearly 40 million people in our country earning less than $17 an hour. Shamefully, the federal minimum wage, despite the efforts of myself and other people here, have not been raised since 2009 and remains an unbelievable $7.25 an hour. Will you work with those of us who want to raise the federal minimum wage to a living wage to take millions of Americans out of poverty?
Senator, I believe that the minimum wage is more of a statewide and regional issue.
So you don't think we should change the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour?
No, sir.
Okay. Mr. Bessent, millions of working class Americans who are struggling to keep their heads above water are paying outrageously high interest rates on their credit cards. Over half the American people who take out new credit cards are being charged interest rates of over 24%. During his campaign, President-elect Trump promised that he was going to cap credit card interest rates at 10%. I happen to think that that is a very good idea, and I will soon be introducing legislation to do just that. Will you, as if you are confirmed, be supportive of what President-elect Trump said and what I want to see happen, and that is to cap credit card interest rates at 10%?
Senator, I think we can both agree that many credit card companies have been bad actors throughout history, and I will get back to you once.
Now, very simple question. Trump said he wants to cap credit card interest rates at 10%. I agree with him. Will you be supportive of what Trump and I would like to do?
When President Trump takes office, and if I am confirmed, I will follow what President Trump wants to do.
Okay.
Yeah, so there it is. The numbers are a little bit shocking of the massive income disparity. Whoop,
Well, I don't think
sorry.
our income disparities are quite as bad. We may only be about 95% of the disparity in the States, but
Yeah, but
pretty
moving
much
into
almost everything he said applies to Canada. The Americans have, in a sense, a better system. At least they acknowledge where the contributions come from to by government, whereas we keep those secret and supposedly have a limit on campaign contributions.
yeah, the control of our government here in Canada, I think, is virtually total by the corporate sector and the very, very wealthy 0.1%. And it's something that should be talked about, but isn't.
Well, it's just sort of thinking in a sense that you're part of the media. Can you get in to go and see the Prime Minister of Canada anytime you feel like? Well,
No.
the big media corporations can do that and ask for what they want.
And
Why shouldn't you?
yeah, and I just wish they would ask the right questions, but a lot of questions are simply not allowed. If reporters and journalists started asking questions like what Bernie Sanders was talking about, they wouldn't be journalists for very long because they'd be fired by CBC or CTV or the Globe and Mail or any of our local papers or anywhere else. It's just not allowed. And in the States, there is a little bit more independence. Somebody like Bernie Sanders can ask those kinds of questions. And, he's relatively free to do that. But in Canada, it's more controlled in our governments, I think.
Well, we should look at these confirmation hearings that the nearest Canadian equivalent to what these various people are being appointed to is as deputy ministers. Shouldn't we start having the right to question our deputy ministers on what their plans are? They're the ones that will be feeding the advice to the cabinet minister further up.
Yeah.
And we don't know what they want or what they think. They actually don't even know the names of most of them.
Yeah, we don't. It's very true. Or the cabinet ministers, for that matter.
Yeah, they've sort of become overshadowed in this. As Bernie Sanders calls it, oligarchy, and that's exactly what it is. They're just basically handmaidens to whoever's calling the shot from above now.
And I looked up the meaning of the word oligarchy, and it's government by the few, and that's includes the idea that that government is corrupt or despotic. It's not a good government by the few. It's a corrupt and despotic government by the few. And I think that's where we are in Canada, and that's where they are in the States as well. Okay, anyways, I'm always interested. Well, not always, but, Bernie Sanders has some interesting things to say, that's for sure. So we're going to move on to a brief discussion of a couple of different topics. Norm, how about if I start with mine and then we'll move on to yours? The one I have to start with is about the prorogation of our parliament by Justin Trudeau a few weeks ago. Here's a story. There has been a lawsuit launched against that prorogation. So the headline says federal court expedites lawsuit challenging prorogation of parliament. And the case has been brought to court, and the federal government has said, the federal court has said they're going to hear the case as soon as possible because they want to hear the case before the prorogation expires, which is, I think, in late March. So the court will be able to rule while the prorogation is still going on, whether it is legal or illegal. And there was a case in 2019 in Britain which reflects completely on this, because what happened in Britain in 2019 was Boris Johnson was the prime minister. He prorogued the British Parliament against the wishes of the Parliament. The case was taken to court, and within 4 weeks, the British Parliament ruled that the prorogation was illegal. And Parliament sat again starting the very next day. So it was all done within 4 weeks, and it looks like they're going to do the same here. So if it was illegal in Britain, which is according to common law, it should also be illegal in Canada. And I believe it is. And I think the reason that this prorogation court challenge is getting seemingly no support from our parliamentarians and no mention by the media is that they want the prorogation to go ahead. But in a parliamentary democracy like Canada, Parliament is supreme. So to allow the Prime Minister to shut down the Parliament when it was going to vote him out, in my opinion, has to be illegal. And yet it happened, and it's being challenged in court, and there's nothing in the media or from our politicians about it. And it's also, I just thought of this today, it's happening at this very moment when our country is seemingly under attack by President Trump's tariffs, which, that's another story, but the tariff issue is there. And where's our parliament? Prorogued.
Well, Jack, first of all, this isn't the first time that it's not quite as blatant, I guess you could say, as when Harper used proroguing Parliament when he knew he was going to lose a vote of no confidence. Now, there's that whole issue, but there's also, in a lot of ways, my biggest criticism is that Trudeau should have resigned a year ago, and they could have had an orderly leadership campaign without proroguing Parliament. Now that they've put this all into a compressed system, that they may really have had no choice but to prorogue Parliament. And
it's not their choice.
Well, it doesn't matter. Well, it is
cannot
their
be
choice.
It cannot be the Prime Minister's choice.
Hold on. It is their choice. I'd like to disagree with them that it isn't their choice, but you said under common law that increasingly over the years, Canada and I think many other countries in the world have gone more to mercantile law, which I'm still working on what all that means. But essentially, common law to a great extent will be by codifying it and saying what it's supposed to be, and the people lose more and more of their rights. I think the simplest way is to think of it, the skipper of the ship is in command and what they say goes. Well, that's exactly, we've got the ship of state where the Prime Minister is the captain of the ship, like it or not, and they can do whatever they want.
No, he's not, and no, he can't.
Well, no,
we'll see in a few weeks. Let's move on to the next topic.
I was going to say,
okay,
that is under Admiralty law. Now, I'd like to think we are living under a common law situation, which you're, of course, quite right. And this is where that's got to be settled. Are we under Admiralty law, in which case, let's get out of it?
Yeah. Well, hopefully by the end of February, a court will rule, and hopefully, we'll see how they rule. Norm, your topic was?
Well, actually, I've got a whole series there. We were talking about the media, so I thought I would bring up CBC's Top Stories. Now, these stories aren't necessarily the ones I think are the most important, but you see these blurbs, but they're very seldom brought up and looked at in any real depth. To show what they have. Yeah, well, each one of these we could be discussing to a great extent, but they're there for a day or two in the media and gone. And I don't know if there's any particular ones you'd like to pick up that you can see on the screen here right now. To a great extent, that's one of my biggest concerns, is that something makes the media for a day and then it's gone. And so often there are topics that should be discussed. I think further down on that page there was something about Canada is going to up its defense funding to 2% shortly. Well, that to me is a big issue to look at, not so much whether our military is doing the right thing. That's a whole different discussion of what's going on. But dumping 2% more into military spending, what a lot of people don't realize, that now they are classifying Elon Musk as the biggest beneficiary of defense spending in the States. Most of his fortune has come from subsidies from the federal government or from governments around the world. And that's not really talked about, those type of issues. That, as I say, if we're going to up our spending to 2% or Trump wants to 5%, shouldn't there be someone asking, are we getting value for our money?
Yeah, of course. Of course.
And that's not being asked.
Yeah. And I don't even, Mehdi was on 2 weeks ago, and he talked about the actual numbers. I don't remember what they are, but when we go up, if we go up to 2 billion, it's billions of extra dollars that are going to be spent on the military. And they've created the enemies, and now they're telling us we have to spend more and more money on a military to protect us from these enemies. And while people can't afford to eat or to live in Canada anymore, or get healthcare because there's not enough money to spend on healthcare, it's really, we're really being moved, I'd say, in crazy directions. Let's just talk about climate change for a minute, which is another topic that you and I disagree on. So,
well, before you get into it, do you know how they're measuring the temperature or what's going on? They're looking at thermometers they've had in place for many years as the urban zone has grown out, and there are urban heat islands which cause those temperatures to go up. But I can tell you where I'm living, and I basically know this area for 73 years. In the summertime in particular, the temperatures are not as hot as they were when I was a kid. Now you get into the urban heat islands, that's a whole different discussion. But in terms of landmass, those urban heat islands are quite small. But they haven't reevaluated where these thermometers should be set to get a proper average temperature of the world.
Right. Fair enough. My feeling is that the human race is changing the atmosphere. We're putting more carbon dioxide and a variety of other gases into the atmosphere, and they are trapping heat, and the planet is therefore warming up. We seem to have already passed the 1.5 degree rise from pre-industrial times that it was considered a tipping point, because once we get past that, which we are now past, things begin to spiral out of control. So the fires erupt, and they put so much, they can't be stopped in many cases, like what's happening in the LA area now and in Canada over the last few years. And no matter what we do, the fires and the thawing of the permafrost, which is a huge reservoir in the north for methane, those things start to happen and we cannot control them. So it begins to be a self-fulfilling thing where it's now virtually, hopefully not, but seems to be out of our control. And I don't see anybody slowing down. Like, nobody wants to drive less, fly less, consume less, or anything else. So we seem to be on a road to disaster.
Well, the more methane in the atmosphere, I think, is a real problem.
Yeah.
There's a fairly strong and competent scientific opinion that actually we are at one of our lowest levels of CO2 in the atmosphere, and it's needed to grow more. But also, one of the big problems they're not talking about loudly, I've heard a little bit of it coming out of California, certainly applies here, is the dry timber or tinder in the forests. That at one time in this area, before white men got here, there were certain natives in the interior that their job was actually to go around and light fires to burn off the flammable timber or tinder before it could cause a serious fire for them. And they had quite a respected position. We
I've
all
heard that.
had a problem with slash burning that was stopped about 40 years ago here. We really reduced slash burning from logging operations. And that's left all this dry tinder in the forests, which is a fire hazard in its own right, and that hasn't been talked about to a great extent. Well, there could be other factors involved. I won't get into are the chemtrails causing it and all these other issues, but our basic land management practices should be turned back when it comes to forest fire protection, which, by the way, have been changed to wildfires, which I get a chuckle out of.
Yeah. Okay, so people can see that we disagree on this topic, but let's look at it from a different perspective. Do you think we should have more public transit and less private use of automobiles?
I do for a lot of reasons, in the sense that we can't keep building roads. Don't forget, I used to build roads. I like building roads, but we can't keep building more and more roads. We have to rethink our transportation.
Yeah. Would you be willing to see flying restricted in some way, which is a large contributor to, in my opinion, to climate change? Or at least private jets. How about that?
Well, definitely private jets. And our society has come to this. We have to do everything instantly. And that means get over to New Brunswick in a couple of hours or whatever it takes to get to New Brunswick now by plane. Whereas in the old days, you took your time, you traveled by train to get there. We've got to slow down our society and take our time to do that type of thing. And planes don't help. And certainly all these private jets, there really is no particular need for them.
Would you be willing to see, like, AI is now being touted as a major contributor to climate change because it seems to require large amounts of electricity to make AI work. Would you be willing to see us not go there in order to see if maybe, assuming this human-caused climate change is correct, would you be willing to stop the AI thing in order to use the precautionary principle?
Jack, long before we get to worrying about the amount of energy AI is going to use, if it's 10 to 100 times on an AI search, I'd like to see AI stop for a lot of reasons. It's bad.
Yeah. And I'd also like to see the entire packaging industry completely change. So when we go into a supermarket to buy stuff, it's more sold in bulk, and we're bringing our own packaging, because that industry, the plastics industry, not only does it use huge amounts of energy, but it's destroying the planet in 100 other ways as well. So I think there are definitely positive steps we can and should be taking to protect the environment in 1,000 different ways, and I'd like to see us do it.
Well, one of the reasons for the packaging is so they can sell more product to you. That recently I needed a couple of nuts and bolts. You used to be able to go into the hardware store and pick up a couple of them. These were small, 10 cents, 20 cents a piece, whatever, and you'd get the ones you wanted. But now, when I went in, I had to pay something like $10 for a whole package of bolts. I forget how much I had to pay for the nuts to go with them. I only wanted 2. I've got somewhere over 50 of them now. I had to pay for them. It's a marketing way to make me buy more product.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the packaging is, once you get it out, you've got to throw the packaging away. It's basically destroy the package to get anything out of it.
Yeah. So I think there are definitely areas where we do agree on, even though we may disagree on the climate change thing.
Well, when people are concerned about climate change, I see a lot of other reasons that we should use less fossil fuels for a lot of other reasons other than climate change. And if they want to use climate change to convince people they should stop doing these things, I'm somewhat willing to go along with it.
We were going to do an interview of Norm interviewing me, but I think we'll do that for the next show. And we'll bring this one to an end. And that, Norm, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching this segment of Citizens Forum.